Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Manchester United football podcast. I'm your host, as always, Phil Brandt, joined my regular co-host, the excellent James Rhodes. This is, of course, first podcast we've done since Amorim was announced. Amorim was announced shortly after we released the podcast last week,
Mm-mm.
and United have also played Leicester since then. Of course, um, there's been a number of attempts to speak to Amorim by Gary Cadwell very rudely. Of course, United had the result yesterday against Chelsea. So we'll talk about all the talking points since we've recorded last. We'll take a look ahead to Amorim, and we will talk about a few other United-related talking points. So first of all, mate, how was your weekend?
Yeah, pretty good, pretty good. It's starting to get wintry out here and snowy and cold. So stuck inside. We had snow overnight, but otherwise it was nice. It's definitely feeling of optimism around United as well, and just kind of enjoying this sort of, I don't know what you'd call this weird temporary period that we're in at the moment, without having to get too worked up or take things too seriously, and that's always a nice thing. But it was good.
I don't know if you're on the run in the witness protection program or if it's Movember. So tell me all about it, wee man. You're sporting a price.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the. It was actually mostly just for fun. Is that my wife and son were mostly, my son was teasing me about doing different things with shaving and with my facial hair and all that, and he was asking me if I could do something different. So I did something a little bit different, and I told him, I said, "All right, I'm going to do something different, and I have a feeling you're not going to like it." So when I shaved everything else except my mustache last week, I think it was
Everything
Monday.
else?
Everything else from the neck up,
Okay, all
and
right.
down from here. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Just let's say just this zone, okay. Keep it there. I mean, I won't speak about the other, but anyway, it's okay. Well, he walked in on after I finished just leaving the mustache, and he goes, "That looks horrible." And so I said, "Yeah, well, there you go. So I'm gonna keep it for a couple more weeks, just because you wanted me to." So yeah, it's a that's what
very,
we're doing now.
very, very cool, mate. Very, very cool. United over the weekend, of course. We'll start there. Draw with Chelsea. Not a great game. Lots of different talking points within the game. Young Alejandro Garnacho being singled out, probably not unsurprisingly. Xerxes as well for all the wrong reasons. It was a game United could have won. I don't think they were as bad as some people have made out them to be. Bear in mind, Chelsea have had a decent start this season. They've been in decent form, and they've had a number of
They
really good.
moved into the top four with the point. Yeah.
Yeah, so wasn't an easy game by any means, but probably a game United should have won. What was your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, I thought overall the quality between the two teams wasn't stellar for sure. It was a little bit, you know, it was a little bit just mediocre, as you can kind of tell. It seemed cagey. It seemed like both of the teams were a little bit, I don't know what the word for it be, but out of sorts. I thought that relative to Chelsea, United were probably the better side for most of the game. At least for the second half was pretty even, though I think United had maybe the better chances. And then in the first half, it was split a bit as well. And I thought they were okay. I mean, in general, I didn't think the game was particularly different to what we've seen through this season for the most part. Frankly, I didn't think the Leicester game was that different either, aside from actually finishing some chances and really Casemiro looking a little bit free and happy. Aside from that, it wasn't that different. The formation isn't that different. The setup isn't that different. The style, the way of playing, really not much different, and you wouldn't expect it to be. Van Nistelrooy's been there with Ten Hag as the coach, so you'd expect it pretty much to be more of the same. And it was okay. I mean, maybe a little bit more energetic. Again, a little bit less tense. A lot of the same things we've seen: scoring a goal, conceding within 2 to 3 minutes afterwards. That has not changed. That we've seen many times this year. I think overall, it was all right. Given the circumstances, not unhappy with the way that they played. They made a few chances, gave themselves a shot to win it. Just didn't, but that's okay. I mean, for an interim run here after the season we've had, taking a point against Chelsea, it's like this could be way worse, considering the games that we have ahead of us.
Well, I think one of the positives is obviously Mazraoui's performance, which was
Yeah, he was
exceptional.
exceptional. Yeah.
Really, really top-notch performance. Thought he was brilliant. Um, you know, you really want to focus on the negatives. Um, I don't like. I understand that in the immediate aftermath of a game, you're emotional, so you say things. I've done it myself. That you an hour later, with a more measured assessment, you probably wouldn't say it. I've cringed at some of the things I've said after games, but I don't like this targeted, not abuse, but major criticism of Garnacho
Mm,
and people making their minds up. Oh, I mean, this is honestly one of the most frustrating elements of social media of how
mm.
there's no nuance. You're either the goat or a fraud,
Yeah.
and there's always nothing in between. Um,
And
and
somehow it changes from game to game too.
yeah, right, exactly. Alejandro Garnacho is an exceptional young player. He's 20 years of age in every other aspect of the football pitch. He's a typical 20-year-old.
Mm,
He thinks like a typical 20-year-old, makes mistakes in his personal life, as you and I do. Everybody does. Makes mistakes in his professional life, as you and I do. Everybody does. And it would be remarkable if a young player didn't have swings in form up and down in what we would call, most people would call, either the strongest, most competitive league in the world or thereabouts. It's the highest level.
yep.
And where was Harry Kane at 20? I think he was
Mm,
around 1 million, wasn't he? Uh,
yeah. Yep.
you go
Yep.
through a whole host of players by 20 years of age that barely scratch the surface. He's an exceptional young talent. He goes through ups and downs. Does he make bad decisions sometimes? Sure, but I've never made a bad decision from the couch either. I've finished every chance, put every ball through. So everything that he did, I mean, you have to expect some of this, variance with young players, this
Yep.
broad swing, because as you get older, you're supposed to flatten that curve a bit and make that swing narrow. But you know, yeah, I mean, there's been the last few games have not been his best. I've said that on here, but I mean, he is a prodigious young talent, James, and I think they were very lucky to have him. And in fact, I remember the cup final United lost to City when they took Sancho off and Garnacho came in. I remember reading a lot of the reactions from City fans about how petrified they were of Garnacho when he came in. The following season, he scores in the cup final against them. There's a young
Mm.
kid that scored. Last season was his breakout season. This is a young kid that scored a number of exceptional, crucial goals, and he's having a bit of a dip. But it wouldn't be an issue, James, just like Xerxes, if United were getting goals from other areas, but they're not.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's always important to put things in context too when we look at all of these players, which is that, United obviously went out this summer with a strategy to get young signings, right? If you actually look at the level of experience of a lot of these guys, like Joshua Xerxes, of Manuel Ugarte, obviously Lenny Yoro, who hasn't played yet,
Yeah,
is a very, very young player. When you look at the minutes of them, I know that, Xerxes 23, I think, but when you look at their actual senior minutes at a top level team, Joshua Xerxes, Manuel Ugarte, Alejandro Garnacho are all pretty similar in their experience level, their number of minutes for a top team. And it's actually comparable. I looked at this the other day. It's actually comparable in their experience level to where Saka was at when he was 18 years old, maybe just turning 19 from an experience level. And in that season when he was 18, he only got 5 goals, 3 assists, for Arsenal in 2021, and continued to develop. And everybody takes different paths, that and I think that it's not always even, when you look at these players. We've seen at United over the last 10 years how many players have suffered from the constant chop and change and development and all of that, as we see, because Garnacho is a great talent. I think there's valid concerns as to whether or not how we develop him, how we continue. Will he get a chance to develop that talent into what it could be? where in for many years at United, you'd be worried that's not going to happen, and that we're going to ruin another young player, or that players don't ever take that kind of next step beyond when you look at what's happened. I mean, I think Marcus Rashford is a really good player, and I think if we'd had a settled team for the last 10 years when he broke in at a young age, how much better he could have had, a better time he could have had in development and in everything that has happened. And that has to be understood. I mean, the last 2-3 years has been chaotic. And it speaks to the attitude with all these players. Joshua Zirkzee has 2 senior seasons on 2 different teams, and now he's in his 3rd senior season on a 3rd different team. Manuel Ugarte is the exact same. 2 full senior seasons on 2 different teams, now in his 3rd season. And that was his 2nd start in the entire Premier League, was against Chelsea the other day. I thought he was kind of poor, but it's the same discussion around all of them. They all need a lot of time. It's no surprise, right? You said Mazraoui, we bought him for 15 million. He's also 27 and has played many, many, many seasons at top level. Same as Matthias de Ligt, who I think has been really well, right? He was just, captain at Ajax for a few years, and then multiple seasons at Juventus, multiple seasons at Bayern, comes to United. These players have more experience. That's why they look better. That's why they're more consistent. They're further along in this developmental track. And it's important, as in general, that we look at everybody and say, we made that decision. Lenny Euro's going to have his struggles when he comes in as well. I think he may be the best talent we bought, but he's going to struggle. There are going to be games when he looks like, he'll make mistakes where he's going to pass it to a player and there's going to go right in on goal, or he's going to have these moments that look poor. These things happen. And I do think it's important as fans, we look at the whole picture of this. If we want young players, which most of the fan base does, they want young talents. They want to, they talk about getting them before they're the stars. Well, you got to deal with the developmental process that goes with that. And that applies to really everybody there.
I don't know if it was last week's podcast or the one before, we were having this conversation about playing young players.
Yeah.
And everything has a consequence. I mean, look, even if you become a fully fledged pro in your prime, you're going to have inconsistency because that's
Of
life.
course.
You're not a robot, right? We are inconsistent in our everyday lives because we're affected by so many things that determine how we do a particular job or do a particular thing. They're also playing against other players who maybe, they are also consummate professionals, and so it's thinking that variance, you can get that. Ronaldo and Messi ruined this for everybody, where everyone expects you to have this exceptional performance week in, week out, week in, week out, week in, week out. I mean, you even hear this in Madrid over Jude Bellingham being questioned. I mean, to me, do these people have no memory? I mean, I don't know. Is this just? I understand our need for instant gratification and the fact that we're heavily influenced by what we're watching, and it drives our behavior. When you're a day after, emotions will drive your behavior, but not control them. The immediate aftermath, most people's emotions are controlled by what they've just witnessed. And I've even tried to do this myself, where I'm like, okay, wait, because if my analysis on this 2 hours later will be totally different.
Yep.
But I just look at this and I'm like, anyone that knows anything about football knows that this is a perfectly normal process with young players. This was true of Ronaldo. I mean, I remember when Ronaldo came to United, how long it took him before he really found that point where he was consistent. To compare, I'm not saying Garnacho's better than Ronaldo.
Right.
What I'm trying to say is, if you look at the stats at the same age, Garnacho's significantly ahead of him, right? These, occasionally you get a Lamine Yamal or someone who's a 17-year-old phenom, but this is, as you quite rightly said, development. It takes many different paths.
Yep.
They're not all the same, and so to me, we're very lucky to have a young player like that. Zirkzee coming in for a lot of criticism, and I understand why, because obviously United need goals from central positions. This was something I brought up first week. I was watching him, and I was like, this. He doesn't strike me as someone who's desperate to score goals. He
Right.
doesn't strike
Yep.
me as someone who thinks like a striker, where they're, when the ball's ahead of him, how desperate is he to get it in the box and goal scoring positions?
Yep.
I don't see that, and I don't think he sees himself as someone whose first responsibility is to score goals. What he looks like to me is a player that is a bit unsure. He's lacking confidence. He's come into this massive football club, pressure like he's never had before. The manager's gone. The environment's not great. He's still trying to find himself in that dressing room. He's still trying to find, where he trusts himself.
Yep.
Hoyland and Xerxes in top teams are backup strikers. Neither of them have ever come close to having a 30 goal a season.
Yeah, at this point in their careers, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yep.
So, you know, if United have a prolific goal scorer at number 9, none of the issues that we're talking about really get discussed that much.
Mm.
Forlan might take a year before he started scoring, but there was other players ahead of him that were scoring goals, and he ends up becoming a cult hero because of once he scored it, it's kind of was against Southampton, then it just started happening.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he's good enough for United or not. I don't know if he's going to succeed or not. I'm not committed to his failure. I sort of feel for him a bit because the reality is, other than the first season when Rashford did it, Ten Hag or United have not been able to get anyone scoring goals at a
Correct.
consistent, regular level in that
Yep.
team. And that's not just been an issue for Xerxes, it's been an issue for Hoyland, it's been an issue for everyone but Rashford at one point.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, outside of that little stretch, and even with that included, United's goal scoring has been poor for 3 years, and that's not, and so it's hard to put that on an individual, and it's like one of the things is as well as obviously it comes down to, what are you being asked to do, what's suited to you, and all of these aspects of it. For someone like Joshua Zirkzee, for example, he's coming from a team in Serie A where they dominated possession and territory in a very, very possession heavy team. Under Thiago Motta was there last year, right? And he moved to Juventus now. But they dominated possession. I think they're the second highest possession team in the league. You can see he's a player that looks more comfortable moving in smaller distances. When he gets on the run in the bigger distances, like we've been playing as a very like transitional heavy team, he looks like you've caught him in nowhere. Like he has no business running in those spaces, and he has no idea what to do with it. When he gets that ball in that one instance, and he's like kind of behind the defense, but he's got to run and like run in on net. You can tell it's like brain breaking. He's not doing that.
Yeah,
That's
because
not
you can
something
see
he's
that
familiar with.
for a number 9 that lies on the last shoulder, they're
Yep.
comfortable, but
Yep.
he's always someone that's getting the ball behind the play.
Yes.
So
Yes.
everything's in front
Correct.
of him, and
Yep.
he has time to lift his head, pick a pass, shoot. But how often does he find himself in a position where he's the most advanced forward?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Not often, and not often. And so when he does, it's not his game. So, if we're in a game where we're camped around the final third and trying to find that goal, you can see where he'd be someone kind of dropping in and moving around and what he wants to do. But so there's a lot of different ways to view these players. And obviously, Ten Hag lost his job. He lost his job for a reason. And the job of the next manager is, in many instances, look at all of this and say, how do I take this unit of players in conjunction with the guys in charge, Wilcox and Ashworth and such, and say, how do I take this unit of players and play to their strengths? How do we work it out that we get the most out of this team? And there's going to be some players, who it just doesn't work out with. That's okay. That happens. But it's certainly, I would say, probably right now is the worst possible time to judge anybody like on what's going to happen, on where they're going to end up, on how it's going to go, because it certainly is a club in transition and a team in transition. And you're not going to look, you don't get that much done training wise, coaching wise, all of that in a normal season midweek when you're playing in between a Wednesday and a Sunday game. You're not learning anything, so it's not like these guys are going to you're going to expect anything to change from what we've seen over the last few months. And so we're just going to see what happens with these guys.
substantive changes to happen, that takes longer
Yeah,
because what was happening when Ten Hag was here was not an accident, right?
correct.
So, and as we had said before, all these problems won't leave with Ten Hag, right? I
Yep.
mean, there's still legitimate issues that exist that need to be fixed, and I've noticed subtle differences since Ten Hag has left. Against Leicester, one of the things that was I felt was a bit different was they started the second half poorly in that game, and then they wrestled control back and played better,
Mm,
played well for longer than just 45 minutes. Um, I was looking at the team on Sunday, and you see this clip, of course, that's been doing the rounds with Casemiro, Bollock and Garnacho. And I'm looking at that, and I'm like, I think that's probably the first time in a long time where I've seen Casemiro exhibit uh, almost the leadership quality, like taking a responsibility for what was going on the field. I mean, he scored the last goal in Ten Hag's tenure. I'm not saying that he wasn't giving everything under
yeah,
Ten Hag, but I felt like that was the first time he felt that he was also very connected to the result and to doing well. You saw it with
yeah,
Nana, where it
mm,
wasn't just about make sure I do my job. And of course, we know there's certain players in the dressing room that didn't like Ten Hag. That will be true in any football club with their manager, and some of them will feel liberated by the fact that he is gone, and
yep,
they'll feel like obviously that heaviness was lifted, so that's inevitable. But
yep.
just notice some little subtle differences in the way, you know. Do you think it was a coincidence that Mazarui had his best game? It's not a leading question. I genuinely don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's tricky. One of the things that was a little bit odd for me, there with it is that I think that what was really weird about the Mesraoui thing is when he was signed. A big reason he was signed and why it was so late in the window is
Right?
because it was after Luke Shaw was injured, and we needed a left back.
Mhm.
And then we signed Mazraoui, and then he didn't play on the left. Not a single game until now. And you know
Yeah,
what? He should have been because he technically is so much better than Diogo Dallo with both feet. He looks so comfortable on that side. Using his left foot is the same as using his right to him. And I think that was part of it in comparison. When Dallo was on that side, not that he was bad every game over there or anything, but you can tell his limitations technically with his left foot always going inside with his right, always going back onto his strong foot. With Mazraoui, it was like so natural, seeing someone there who looked like he was born in that position. And he's looked like that on the right at times too, but we've had no left back for such a long time. I was like, wow,
all
this
the
is
left backs I've seen at United, which at Shaw, that's the best
yeah.
left
I
back
agree.
since them.
It was incredible, but there's other factors too, like you say, which was interesting, which is his intensity was so high. His tenaciousness to win the ball back, to press, to do the things that were there were so high. And I don't know what the reason is. I don't know if we've seen in the way that we've played structurally that on the right, he often drops into the back line, so he's playing a more defensive role. When he was on the left, maybe he just had more freedom to go forward. I don't know the exact answer if it was just just a strategic thing or if it's a mentality thing, but it did look different and he looked sensational there. And it makes you say, all right, well, shoot, we don't know what's going to happen with Luke Shaw, whether he's ever going to make it back on the pitch, quite honestly. But at
Yeah,
least he can play there, and I'd be totally comfortable if Mazraoui played there the rest of the season after seeing that, because he's obviously got whatever it takes to do that position.
what do you think of Lisandro Martinez's tackle? I think part of the reason why he did not get sent off, two reasons. I think one because of Bruno against Spurs, and
Mm,
because of
it's fairly similar.
the Tom decision last
Yeah,
week. Also,
I
it was at the end of the game, so if
yes.
that happens in the 60th minute, maybe it's a
Mm.
different decision. But I think that he was looking.
I think he was a little bit like it's because I do think you're right. I think red cards are often given somewhat contextually to the situation of the game. Like if it's really close to the end of the game, you're kind of like I think the official looks at it like if it wasn't like
Unless you're Michael Oliver, if it was who
right,
said
unless you're
Oliver.
Michael Oliver, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
But they
Go.
do often try to not make game-changing calls too close to the end of games and it's understandable why. It's one of those tricky things, but it wasn't egregious. It wasn't like like just a straight up 100%. His foot is high, but he brings it down and it kind of like scrapes on the leg as it goes down and you're kind of
Mm.
I think I could see red for sure. Like I could see why he would get a red card on it. I can see why he wouldn't if he didn't get one on the pitch at the same time too.
It's
Like,
70-30.
yeah, I do think it's probably a red, but I also think that in the context of how they tend to adjudicate these games, unlike what happened at West Ham, they often won't give a red for a borderline tackle at that point in the game. So I thought he got a little. I think he's gotten away with a couple, like,
Who did he go
the
into
leap
it against? Was it Southampton or was it
is
Palace?
Palace. That one was to me worse because that was one of the worst tackles I've ever seen someone make. Like just pure, inarguable that it was a dangerous play. It meets the definition right for reckless. Right, it doesn't even have to make contact. It was reckless as hell. That one was far worse. I think this one was more of a slip, more of an accident, whereas that one was pretty deliberate. So,
Yeah.
he's walking a fine line though, because he's been a bit more out of control this season, I think, than we've seen. That aggression is positive, but we've seen like with guys like Eric Bailly who have played for us that they have this aggression. Once it spills out of control, they can start racking those red cards up and you just lose it. And I think he's got to watch it a little bit.
I know a clip that's been played repeatedly on social media of Rashford. I think it's Reece James goes in on him. Was it Caldwell or Reece
In
James?
the box, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was actually Fofana.
Anna,
It was
well,
Fofana or Caldwell after he beats Gusto, right? When he goes
it's a
by him in the
penalty
box.
last week at West Ham. That's a penalty.
I think
And
it's
I don't
even
understand how
yeah.
you
They
can
didn't
look at
even
what
review it. That's what was baffling, right? Because he beats him, and the player goes studs up right into his foot.
yeah.
Why? Why is it not a penalty? I have no idea why that's not a penalty.
Obviously, I don't want them to give it because they gave last week's. I don't want them to give two wrong decisions. We
Right.
want to get these right. But, and of course, the reaction to last week was from some of the media and commentators rightly indignant. But why wasn't Michael Oliver stood down? He got the City bonus
Yep.
game. Why I don't understand why he escaped consequences
Yep.
it's some reprimand of some kind that because this does need to happen. I'm not saying he cost Eric Ten Hag his job because let's be honest,
There were other
he
reasons.
didn't.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be one bad decision away from losing the
Yep.
job, but those decisions have consequences.
Yep.
And I don't remember the PGM apologizing to United. I think they acknowledged it was from Dermot Gallagher and a couple of others that it was wrong, blatantly wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I don't remember getting an apology of any kind, the way they've done with other clubs, and having some type of consequence for Lisandro Martinez. We had apology over Bruno Fernandez's red card, and I thought they were really hard done by, but Delict being made to go off the field, which cost United a goal against Brentford.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
shouldn't have. United should be a bit more resilient, but I thought that Hoyland's was a penalty. He embellishes the
I
contact.
think it
Obviously,
was.
he
Yeah.
gets it, but it was a penalty,
Yep.
and I think that. I thought that United should definitely had a penalty for the Rashford thing, and it didn't hardly get mentioned in the media afterwards.
No, and even during the game, I was thinking they were going to review it, they're going to do something, and nothing really happened. But I agree, and it's still that consistency issue, of knowing when is it and when isn't it a penalty, because it's like I can understand if you don't want to call those, after the ball is gone, kind of just a little bit of a follow through, doesn't really affect the play. But when you're calling a penalty where the ball's bouncing around, nobody has control, and they're just kind of running into each other, it's the same thing. These are like, there has to be some consistent. I would almost prefer you don't call any of those types of like very ticky-tacky fouls in the box, but it's just weird. It is weird. And
To me, James, if you're looking at what happened at West Ham, to give a penalty to West Ham, you have to make two or three assumptions first,
mm,
and none of those go in United's favour. You
Yeah.
have to assume that Delict is the aggressor, that there's intent, that
Mhm.
that Ings' momentum doesn't carry him into the Delict,
Yep.
that handball is inconsequential. If you can look at that and get and afford all of those subjective views, which are
Yep.
50-50 in my opinion,
Yep.
towards one team and take them from another, that to me is an indication of subconscious bias at the very least. Because
Right.
all it takes for you to do, is to look at that and that should have been a hung jury to me. They should
Mm.
have looked and said, look, there's no way. All it takes is one of those considerations to go in United's favour, which it should have done, for you to say that's not a penalty. You
Right.
can't have a couple of guys looking at that and saying this is a penalty, and then everyone else after it saying it's not. So, what were
Yep.
the relevant, influential causal factors that led you to give that in a moment? Because I
Yep.
want to know. Because those are relevant. I mean, that has to be explained to me. Anyway, we've done that last week,
Mhm.
and of course, I said we'll never see another one like that given all season. And Rashford, that is a penalty.
Mhm.
So to me, you know, still not getting the benefit of the doubt with most decisions. And there was a couple of other decisions in that game that Marcus Rashford getting booked for being fouled and going over and asking. I mean, I just
Like
don't
2 or 3
understand.
players at once too. Like what
Yeah,
on
I
earth
mean,
was
it's a
that?
blatantly obvious foul on him, and then the arrogance of that to me. How dare
Yeah.
you question my decision and be upset at my decision, even though it went wrong, and I'm going to
Yep.
keep you for being upset at it? Like to me, you
Yep.
anyway. Anything else from that game you want to cover, mate?
No, I mean, otherwise the only thing I do find a little bit odd that I'm wondering about, obviously we're gonna have a new manager, so it's not all worth getting too deep into, is I still have quite a lot of confusion over the switching of the roles for Marcus Rashford and Alejandro Garnacho,
I do too.
because I thought they were really, but the way that the game started, I thought both were better. I thought the first 25 minutes, Rashford was very dangerous. That moment you're talking about, the penalty moment, right after that, he gets switched over to the right side and is once again completely out of the game, miles away from the ball, miles away from the goal. And I also think that a lot of times Garnacho's development in decision making has been better when he's on the right side, where he's a little bit more, takes an extra moment maybe to think about it, to make the pass, to play make. And I think he's done a really good job over there. And I thought they were both very good. And after switching, I thought it was bad. I thought it was like a really poor decision. I have no idea what has led to this switch, and I haven't really figured it out yet. We kind of, we've talked about this at length in earlier ones, so we don't need to do too much on it. But after the scoring versus Barnsley being benched, after scoring against Porto being rotated and then moved out of position, I really don't understand what the point is of this whole way of doing things. And then, of course, Amad Diallo not really getting on the pitch at all anymore. It's strange to me. I can't say I understand that. It's one of those questionable things that I wasn't sure if it would change under Van Nistelrooy. It hasn't as of yet. But he was involved in those decisions with Ten Hag too, so it's not really a surprise. It's just something I don't get. It's going to be very different under the next manager anyway, so it's not worth too much
Yeah,
delving into. But I just don't understand it.
I agree. I mean, to
Yeah,
me, when I look at Rashford and Garnacho looks better to me on the right than he has on the left.
same. Yeah,
And, this coincided really Spurs game, then the Porto game where he was on the bench. And I know that, you know, judging by what Roberto Garnacho says on social media, Garnacho would prefer to play on the left. But this left midfield and trying to shoehorn a winger into this left winger position is something that United need to learn from with Sancho.
yeah,
So you need to say, okay, this is my left winger. For if I'm Marcus Rashford, I'm the most senior player in that forward line. I'm asking what's going on.
yeah,
Um, because if I have to move to accommodate Garnacho so that he can, does I'm not the best on. I don't know if this is a hypothetical, so maybe Marcus is totally fine with this and this is what he wanted. I don't know, but to me, it'd be like, okay, you know, if my best position is on the left and I have to accommodate Alejandro Garnacho, I would be asking questions in that position.
Yeah,
Because he's a senior
exactly.
player. He's the one that scored, the 30 goals a season. Garnacho's not there yet. He may get there. I'd be asking, you know, when do you play through my strengths? And maybe he's okay with it. I don't know. I thought he played well on the right against Barnsley. I thought he played, I've seen him last season at Champions League playing on the right. I remember Galatasaray at home, putting the ball on Hoyland's
Yep.
head. I've seen him have good games on the right, to be fair. But it's something that's bizarre to me because, again, United not scoring goals. You scored a goal from a set piece, a penalty. Last week, look at the chances they missed. And that front three just doesn't,
It hasn't been working. It's not like it's been flying or anything,
Garnacho doesn't want to give a ball up.
Yeah.
Garnacho wants to go to goal and shoot.
Yeah.
And so he's a kid that's hungry for goals, in my opinion. But he doesn't have the
Yeah.
physique of a striker, and he doesn't have the skill set of a central striker. So if you're a forward in that position where you're waiting on being fed from the wings, it can be a bit frustrating because you've got wingers that want to cut in and score. And this is sort of where I make some, some leeway for Xerxes in the same way I do with Hoyland. If you look at Xerxes and Veghorst, between the two of them, well, they scored one Premier League goal.
Right. Yeah.
And that was Xerxes against me.
Yep.
So you
Yep.
bought two strikers at the club. One of them scored one Premier League goal. You spent 85 million on another away winger who's got, was he 4 or 5 Premier League goals in 2 years? So I don't
Yeah.
know. It's thereabouts. You know, you should be getting more goals out of this team.
Yep.
I look at
Agree.
Bournemouth. Well, Jesus, they drew at Villa 1-8, beat Arsenal at home, beat City at home, scoring goals, attacking football. Like, this to me is for Amorim, who's co-work on him now, announced as head coach.
Yep.
One of the things that's going to be very different for him that wasn't this way for other managers at United is he's not going to get a massive transfer budget. He's going to have to be smart.
Yeah.
So he's going to have to get the best out of these players. And
Yep.
like you were saying, this 3-4-3, however he plays it, and whether he will play at United or not, I'm sure he's smart enough to adjust his tactics based on what he has. It's going to be interesting how he fits the three in the forward line.
Yeah, it will, and yeah, I mean, look, it is. This is where it gets very interesting now because, last Monday, obviously, we were discussing Ten Hag being sacked, and by Friday, they had the formal announcements of Amorim becoming manager, and so obviously when I say they now, talking United's leadership team, Dan Ashworth, Omar Barada, Jason Wilcox in particular, were obviously making their own analysis leading up to all of this of the manager. And one of the things that I'm sure they thought of that probably has never been thought of before at United is how the team fits with the manager, right? Because um, when you look at the managers and the way that it's gone over the last things, there's as we know, there's absolutely no continuity between the types of managers, the types of play, the personnel, anything. It's like completely nonsensical. And that you wouldn't have anybody who would actually be able to look at the decisions and say, what is our strengths of our team? What are the strengths of our players? And who's the right manager for this team? That the decisions were probably made on completely different reasons, financial and otherwise, big names, things like that. So it's the first time. I'm sure they've evaluated it. I'm sure they've looked at it. Obviously, he has a small advantage of a player like Manuel Ugarte, who was in his team already. So he gets one former player to work with, at United, that I think will be key. But yeah, I'm very curious. I've watched a lot of sporting. I've been a big fan of Ruben Amorim for a long time, and I tend to like watching Portuguese football because it plays at a very fast pace, which I think is why you can get some players who can transition well. United have had a good history of buying players from Sporting, as we know. We've got more than a few good examples there. And there's been some decent transitions. So I'm quite excited about it. And I think that if he does stick with his system, with his three at the back system, and there's some fairly decent hints that he will. I mean, He's not changed it, I think, once in 3 years now, for any game, and some of the articles that have gone out there have kind of indicated that that's what they believe he'll do, is to stick with it. The front three is very, very curious. One player I really, really, really think is gonna get a lot out of it is Rasmus Højlund, though. A player who has been, as we know, completely starved and devoid of any kind of service at United over the last, 18 months that he's been here, right? I mean, we've said this many times. The striker position is an absolute island at United. It is a graveyard shift, and you are running around for absolutely nothing. And the striker at Sporting, a great finisher, a great runner. He plays a lot like Jokeris there. He plays a lot like Rasmus Højlund does. He's a bit older and more experienced for sure, but a lot of the way that he approaches things with his attack is centered around finding that striker in spaces and funneling the ball to him. And so, I hope there's certain, I hope that while there's obvious adjustments needed, I hope we do get to see Amorim come in and do what he knows best. That's the reason he was hired, for what he's done. And I think there could be some big beneficiaries of that. And Rasmus Højlund, I think, could definitely be the biggest.
Yeah, what you just said there is interesting, because if United put a responsibility on Garnacho to feed a central striker or Marcus Rashford, then how we appraise those players has to change. We can no longer
Correct.
be criticizing them for not scoring 30 goals a season,
Correct.
because you
Yep.
can't have a guy that stops crosses coming into the box, that creates 20 assists a season and scores 30 goals. I mean,
Yes, it's not going to happen. Yeah.
ridiculous. Like, you have to acknowledge that if we can have him do this or do this or do this, but Garnacho and Højlund are young players. It's
Hmm.
one thing Portuguese football is really good at is being able to improve those players.
Yes.
Obviously, Portuguese league, you can do that at the top clubs, because you dominate most games. But I think for you're talking about small, subtle differences, about spaces they occupy, when you
Yep.
release the ball. One of the things that was said yesterday, which I think is something that Amorim is going to have to find a solution to, and I don't know how, is how United are terrible pressers. But I look at this and I go, but why is it that Højlund or Rashford can't play 90 minutes? I mean,
Mm.
Holland's a young striker. Why can he not play 90 minutes? Why does
Yep.
he? Why can he not play 2 games in a week? Why, he didn't play against Leicester. If he plays against Porto and he's not playing at the weekend, he's rested,
Yeah. Yeah.
or they're being taken off after 65 minutes, 65 minutes. I'm like, is this an athletic physicality issue where United just don't have the physical conditioning to do this?
Yep.
Where they're carrying injuries? Where they don't? Is it an athleticism issue? I think one of the reasons why they targeted young players with height, Xerxes was 6'4", they're like 6'3",
Yeah.
where they're
Yep.
about, Lana Euros, 6'1". They targeted
6'3". Yeah.
big
Yep.
physical players with that have physicality, that have athleticism. And I'm wondering, like, we were talking about this with Ronaldo. He's not a good presser. United don't press well from the front. This is a consistent, persistent issue with United. I mean, then of course half their players are injured. Mason Mount's injured. They lose Martial. Just constant, non-contact injuries. Where
Yep.
you're looking at that and going, they're I mean, because to you and I'm looking at this going, are they not trying? Because like I've said this
Weird.
before,
Yeah.
not trying, not getting back to defend, not putting intensity in, and it's visibly, not to say avert, but it's recognizable. I'm looking at
Yeah.
this going, I know his medical department, all that's not being fit for purpose, but these are the things that Amorim's going to have to get into his team.
Yeah. For sure. And it's confusing sometimes, right? Because I don't know the exact answers on some of these things, and one of the things that I personally have felt that we haven't really seen at United, and I think I even mentioned this in the last time, is that I get confused when I don't see, like, there doesn't seem to be consequences or accountability on a consistent basis. And I know that this was in some of the the post sacking kind of story. You get like the big breakdowns from all the people, like, well, these are all the reasons that Ten Hag got sacked and yada yada. And there has been a consistent reporting of things like that. There's not really been a consistent consequence, where X player doesn't track back, they play every game. X player doesn't track back, they're gone at halftime. And that's not been consistent game to game, player to player, and it makes it ununderstandable in terms of how. So some of it can be coaching. When it speaks to the injuries and the fitness, it's so hard to measure this kind of stuff. One of the things that is encouraging, that I think is very helpful, or we'll see how it goes, is obviously that it sounds like he's going to bring with his own guy, which I don't think that Ten Hag got when he first joined. There was a guy he worked with at Ajax that he did not bring with when he first joined. But Amorim will be bringing this guy, Paulo Barrera, I think his name is. He's actually from Liverpool, went to the university in Liverpool. He worked under Brendan Rodgers at Liverpool, so he understands English football as well. But his whole thing, I was reading up on him just this morning, is all about specifically, the load management, and he has a specific line. He gave an interview about his job, talking about how, his job is essentially measuring the player's fitness and how each individual fits into the coach's game model. And I thought it was just interesting that he used that word that we've heard so much as a little bit of a buzzword recently. But I'm encouraged that he's bringing someone that will understand, okay, for how I want to play football as a coach, this is how my players need to be. Like, this is what they need to be able to do physically on the pitch. And then he has someone who's coming who understands that and also has experience in England, I think is helpful there. So, that's something where, when Ten Hag showed up, was probably completely lacking at United. Not, I should say probably, it almost definitely was completely lacking at United, right? And that's something that'll take time to change, but I'm hopeful that that's smart, having someone who understands the coach to combine with the staff at United and the resources at United to say, how do we get these players fit for purpose? Because every manager's demands are going to be different, right? Like, your physical demands, if you're playing in a Sean Dyche team, is going to be very different to the physical demands of playing in a Jurgen Klopp team. And so you've got to have that differentiation. And I would say we've probably never, as a club, until very recently, cared enough to have that differentiation and to understand it, and that I think is probably underlying, some of these issues.
Yeah, look, I think that is one thing that any of us do understand well, is understanding the sports science aspect, nutritional aspect, the
Yep.
load management aspect, physiology, biology, chemistry, and
Yep.
understanding how to get a professional athlete's body to give them every chance of avoiding injury.
Yep.
There's another aspect of this, James, that people won't like, but it's fact of life, is that when you are psychologically drained, if you're in a negative environment, you are much more prone to picking up
For sure.
non-contact injuries. This is true when we're
Totally.
depressed or get sick, right?
Yep.
Your immune system gets depleted, and your pain sensitivity, your threshold, everything changes. And so you start to, notice ailments. You're
Yep.
mentally drained, you're physically drained, and that makes you much more susceptible to all types of little knocks, niggly injuries. It's not that they're not real; they're as real as anything else. But you just have a whole different. Your physiology completely changes when you're in a happy place where you're thriving every day. Where the curve, the bell curve is a little the curve. You flatten the curve a little bit different between the highs and the lows.
Yep.
And you're motivated. You're going. All of a sudden, a lot of these injuries start to disappear.
Yep.
The placebo effect's a very real thing. I've been through this myself when I, got off all the painkillers and got in a healthy mental state. My physical pain that was as real to me as anything else started to really dissipate. And then I
Yep.
realized I need, anyway, the mental health aspect of it, the environmental aspect is big. And I know
Very
some
much.
ex-pros like to say, oh, this is the TikTok generation, like Patrice Evra was saying. But the reality is that they're not mentally weak, James. They're dealing with life issues that we can't relate to because the generational differential now, our parents could understand our life because there's some, cultural differences, subtle differences, societal differences, but very much the same. But because of technology, the psychological, impact on these kids, you and
Yeah.
I, people of our age, we compared ourselves to 4 or 5 friends in our peer group. These kids are being rated against millions upon millions of people,
Mm,
being male or female. Imagine how difficult that is psychologically. If you're
yep.
Alejandro Garnacho, and all of a sudden the people that were calling you the goat a month ago are now calling you shit, a piece of shit, or you should be
Mhm.
told you're a I mean, imagine what that must do to a young.
Yep.
It's hard. I'm an adult. Most of my threads I just mute because there's a deluge of insanity where I'm like,
Yep.
I just can't even be a real person. But
Yep.
it makes me miss people I want to talk to. But I've got an 18-year-old kid who's, I'm putting out something like United played well today. Fuck you, pedophile. My kid's like, why are they calling you a pedophile?
Yeah.
Like, you
Yeah.
just ignore a kid. This is
Yeah, exactly.
and it was like when I see that impact, and I realize, imagine if you're a football player and your brother,
Mhm.
your
Yep.
sister, your mom, your dad reads that. The psychological impact must be horrendous. And
Yep.
fame is the excrement of success, in my opinion. So,
Yeah.
anyway, I think
And it is very different, from ex-players because, as much as there's always been media and things like that, it's very different to, you finish the game, you go into the dressing room, there's no phones, there's no nothing, right? You go home, there's no phones, you're not on the internet, you're not seeing these things. You pick up a paper and it's got a bad headline. Okay. You can still do that now, except you've got all this extra on top of it and it never ends. And it's 24/7 and it's constant. So no, I don't think it makes them weak. I worry about them because I know they're on social media. I worry, how it feeds into, the highs and the lows and the way that they view themselves as players and things like that. I worry about that aspect of it. But I don't think it makes them weak. I think it's just it's really hard to deal with. That's why it's so worrisome.
let me tell you something, and I told you this before, and this is true, especially young boys need to hear this. Young boys validate themselves with really 3 things: money, power, which power, money, power, same thing, right?
Mhm.
And the other one is usually the opposite sex. So the holy
Yeah.
trinity for young boys is upload videos to social media, pictures to social media, where I have a job with enormous status, where I have money, wealth, and a beautiful. Obviously, there's exceptions to that due to
Yep.
sexual preference, but generally speaking, it's that. And what the reality is, this will never validate you ever. And
Yeah.
there is no guy, no man out there, no doing life perfectly that isn't putting their head at night on the pillow, filled with doubt, anxiety, negative inner dialogue, with priors and trauma,
Yep.
insecurities. Everyone's doing that.
Yep.
99% of men who are in relationships, who have kids, who have pressure, or if you're a young boy, we're all filled with those doubts. We're all filled with that anxiety. We're all filled with that uncertainty. No one's doing this perfectly. No one, any caricature you have of someone who's killing it and doesn't have stress or anxiety or worries or all the things that you think are unique to you, it's wrong. So
Yep.
first of all, it's not a feeling on you that you have this. It's
Yep.
no, it doesn't make you any less of a father, a man, or a young boy because you don't have material things, the things that you just want to have because somebody else doesn't, right?
Yep.
And you chase pleasure. And I can tell you this as someone who's a recovered addict, there is no happiness and pleasure. They're two
Yeah.
complicated, okay? And
Yep.
when you learn this lesson about learning how to accept yourself for what you are, because you never let someone else love you until you learn all these things about yourself and realize we're all flawed, we're all imperfect, we all do stupid shit, we all make bad decisions, good decisions, we're trying to be decent people, but life is hard. So it's the
Yeah.
same for footballers. It's the same for they might have one exceptional skill on the field, and yes, they have the money to not worry about paying the bills. But that doesn't mean they don't worry about a million other things that are now in their life that you don't have.
Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, it's a very very difficult thing to be consistent every day. And
Yep.
so I just think like we a lot of young men insecurities about themselves. We're looking for that validation through the things that we acquire, but that doesn't exist. It's so when we say, "Oh, he makes 200 grand a week," we don't have empathy for him. This is the worst way, to
Yeah.
apply any type of currency to a human being, and what their psychological status translates nothing to your material wealth or your money that you make. So, believe me, those people that you think are living that perfect life are filled with stress and anxiety too,
For
100%.
sure.
So, I always try to consider that in my analysis of someone, because
Yep.
I've, I haven't always accomplished that, but even with Jadon Sancho, you know,
Yeah.
I can't invest any energy in the disliking him. To me, it's like
Yeah.
that's not my thing. All right. Lastly, Gary Cattrall goes to Portugal to a Portuguese press conference for the second time in a week, to another football club, and tells the manager to speak English. I'll be
Another
honest,
culture, another country, another
this, this,
everything.
this fucking annoyed me. First of
Yeah.
all, if you could die a second-hand cringe, tell my kids I love them, will you? Right?
Mm,
Because I'm about to keel over and kick a. I mean, how dare you? First of
yeah.
all, it's so disrespectful to Sporting, so
Yes.
disrespectful to Amorim, so disrespectful to Portugal, so disrespectful to your Portuguese colleagues, and the epitome of hubris. I mean, if I was Sporting, I'd have thrown him out. And if I was one of his
Yeah.
Portuguese colleagues looking at him like, are you for real? Who the fuck
Yep.
are you?
Yeah. Yeah, it is absolutely ridiculous in that way, and, I mean, there's it's that badgering for that instant, that moment trying to get that one thing. What's the point? I mean, it's so silly
Right?
to,
No,
to be first to get, a quote from Ruben Amorim, who's gonna be here in a week for, speaking English all the time. Like, come on, give it a rest. So
Amorim
it's
should
stupid
get
in
out
that
there.
way. Yeah, and and here's the thing about Amorim, which is an interesting because you can
Make
see
a
an
statement.
insight.
Go on.
There's an insight into that, into him in his reaction to that you'll kind of hear if you read about some of the Portuguese press, because they love him, and the Portuguese press love him, they adore him, and you can even see, he, which I think is a real positive, because obviously he's going to deal with a lot of pressures, a lot of things like that, and there's the benefit that he has of having Champions League experience as a coach, even from a different league, to understanding some of the press, but you know he's he's got the right attitude for it. He doesn't really get bothered. He's open to practically talking to anybody, answering anything, saying anything. He goes into long, detailed answers on things when he's asked. It's a very, very different, approach. And so I'm choosing to take the positive from the absurdity of someone attempting to do that already in such a stupid situation, because and looking at and him and saying, well, fortunately, I think he can deal with those things, because there's a lot of idiots like Gary Cottrell out there, unfortunately, that will be badgering him, that will be doing things like, I'm not saying like all the United Press, I know many of them, but there's plenty of people out there that are going to do things like that over
Yeah,
the next few
to
years
me,
with him.
it's about basic decorum. It's
Yeah,
about
of course, of
acknowledging a
course.
few things that don't need to be said.
Yes.
One, I'm in Portugal.
Yep.
Two, I've no right really to be at this press conference because I'm not interested in anything related to sporting, right?
Yes.
Which to me, like, sporting should not have credentialed him. Like, if you're not here for sporting, leave. You'll be at Old Trafford next week. We're here
Yeah.
at
Well,
sport press conference. Like, we don't owe you anything.
and to be clear, it's done by UEFA. When it's a UEFA press conference, the clubs don't have control of it, from my
Yeah,
understanding as well, unfortunately.
he was
But
actually one of Friday.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I would have said to him, like,
yeah,
the media, the media team can turn around and say to journalists, no questions on Man United.
correct,
You're
correct.
here for
Yep,
sporting Man City, fine. But you're
yep,
not asking questions. I mean, we all get these briefs, right? You all get told, no,
yes,
we're not going to talk about this, not going to talk about this.
yep,
So don't ask, which
yep,
is fair.
yep,
And for me to have the arrogance to walk into a press conference and then condescendingly say what you just said to Ruben Amorim,
yeah,
that would have been avoided if, one, you'd have had a little bit of humility, a little recognition that you're in his country,
yep,
okay, at a football club that he still works for a press conference for a big game for them, and
yep,
that he has no right. He doesn't owe you anything. I mean,
Yep.
this is when journalism gets turned into guttish entertainment shit.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This is, of course, the direction, unfortunately, journalists have been pushed in, where they're turned into stupid entertainers, where, he's running about there, like Joey Greco off cheaters, sticking the microphone in people's face, get away. I mean, that to me is weirdo behavior. It's so
Yeah, it is.
disrespectful. If that was some YouTuber, they would have rightfully been roasted. So
Correct.
that is, like, to me, unethical. And Sky Sports owe Amorim and Sporting a massive apology. And it's
For
not the
sure.
first time he's done it, as we've seen with Ten Hag and others, even
Yep.
at Bellingham at Dortmund and everything. Like, you
Yep.
know, if Amorim wants to speak to you, he'll come and talk to you.
Yep.
Um, James, if you go to their press conferences in England and you start shouting over the top of Sky and demanding attention, you're going to find out very quickly they don't
Oh
appreciate
yeah,
conduct.
for sure.
Right?
Yeah,
We're right
absolutely.
holders and all this, no, 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 no. You're not a right holder to anything in sport, and that, you haven't been to a press conference in sport in your life until the last
Correct.
few weeks. So,
Exactly.
thing like that, didn't appreciate it, and I hope
For sure. Agreed.
Amorim doesn't play nice for them for too long, because that's what they respect. They respect strength, like a Mourinho
Mm-hmm.
strength, Guardiola strength, a
Yep.
Klopp strength, a Ferguson. You play nice,
Yep.
they're going to keep you alive.
For
All right,
sure.
matey. So before be a week before we do this again.
Yeah.
So
Next time will be on his Emerim's official start
yeah,
date,
Cameron's
technically.
official
So
start
yep.
day. So looking forward to that. Hopefully, you need to pick up 2 wins this week. They should. I
Yeah.
hope. We'll see what happens. But other than that, anything else, mate?
No, no, that's it. I think we're all kind of excited. Then we'll have an excitement and then a 2 week wait. But the other positive I think is there's a bunch of players coming back during this break. Lenny Yoro is supposed to be ready to be back in a squad finally. Mason Mount is back in training today. Supposedly Luke Shaw would be back in training at some point during the break. I don't know if it's up to you if you want to believe, in the second coming or
Well, I
not.
just hope it happens for them as a
I
human being.
hope
Like, I
so
hope
too. Like,
Mason Mount, Luke Shaw, and all can stay fit. I'm not
yeah,
confident in it. But if they don't, if they don't stay fit, I wouldn't blame them personally. Like, but
yeah,
I hope. I don't have a lot of confidence they will, but I hope they do.
for sure. And I think the positive is that Amorim should get about as full a squad as we can get to look at for the first time, to analyze, to train with, to coach, and hopefully, then it'll be very interesting to see the first team he picks, the first way he runs things out there, and his approach. It's probably the most different appointment in a long time, so it should be quite interesting. All of this.
Remember last week you said to me when we mentioned Amorim, it's hard to get a really good manager mid-season. And I
I,
said, if he
and
doesn't leave Sporting right now to come to United, then he's not the right choice.
And he did, and he said it right. They told him now or never, and he took it. And I'm, I-
But I'm happy the way he did it, where
I'm
he said
very
10
happy.
days. That tells
Yep.
me an awful lot about a human being's values and principles.
Yes.
10 days for United
Yep.
is nothing. It's going to have no real material difference, but it says a lot about
Mm,
the type of human being that he is and how important honor and commitments are. So,
agreed.
yeah, I respect that. So,
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I think they did about as good as can get given the
yeah,
circumstances.
very cool. Yeah, how you leave says an awful lot about you.
Yep.
Okay, Matt, we will leave it there. Thank you so much again to all of you for downloading the podcast, for getting in touch with us, for all your tweets, retweets, feedback. Probably next week, the week after, we'll start getting into a bit more transfer info and what you need to be looking at in January with some ins possibly outs coming in. We'll see. But take it easy, mate, and have a good week.
Yeah. See you later.
Cheers, folks. Bye.